For 32 years, a killer lived among us, certain his secret was buried forever. He believed his crime would fade into the past, forgotten by time. But one simple test, a breakthrough in science, shattered his illusion of freedom and uncovered the truth he worked so hard to hide. This is the story of Melanie Road, whose life was stolen in the quiet town of Bath, England. Decades passed without answers, until an unexpected discovery changed everything, unraveling a case that had haunted a family and an entire community. Is this your first time on the channel? Let me know in the comments below. If you're captivated by true crime stories, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. This is a story of tragedy, persistence, and justice, one that deserves to be told. Bath, England, a city renowned for its Roman baths, Georgian architecture, and peaceful charm. It was the kind of place where life moved at an unhurried pace, where the streets were filled with the laughter of families and the quiet routines of daily life. It was a Saturday night in June 1984, and 17-year-old Melanie Road, like so many others her age, was enjoying the start of summer. She'd gone out to a popular local club in Bath with friends, eager to dance and celebrate. The music was loud, the atmosphere lively, and for a while, life felt uncomplicated. As the night stretched into the early hours of June 9th, Melanie said goodbye to her friends. Her house was less than a mile away, a walk she'd made countless times before. The streets of Bath were quiet, and the air was cool. She walked along familiar paths, the sounds of the night fading behind her. Somewhere along that short route, she crossed paths with someone who changed everything. What happened next is pieced together from evidence found at the scene, a brutal attack, sudden and unrelenting, ending with Melanie's life being cut tragically short. When Melanie didn't come home, her family's worry began to grow. As the hours passed, their fear turned to dread. That morning, a passerby made a grim discovery, a young woman's body lying near a pathway in a quiet residential area. The bloodstains on the cobblestones told a story of violence and desperation. The police were called immediately, and the area was sealed off. Neighbors gathered at a distance, their once peaceful streets now marked by flashing blue lights and the hum of emergency radios. For Melanie's family, the confirmation of her identity was shattering. Their worst fears had become reality. The investigation began at full speed. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing anyone who might have seen or heard something that night. Witnesses reported hearing a scream in the early hours, but no one had seen who was responsible. The timeline of Melanie's final hours became the focal point of the inquiry. Forensic teams worked meticulously, collecting everything they could from the scene. Among the evidence was a vital clue: DNA left by the attacker. In 1984, this was a breakthrough, but it was also a frustrating limitation. While the sample could be preserved, the technology to use it effectively was still years away. Detectives followed every lead they could, chasing tips and investigating individuals who matched descriptions provided by witnesses. Yet, the case proved elusive. Promising suspects were ruled out, and without a clear direction, the investigation began to stall. As the weeks turned into months, the active search for Melanie's killer slowed, though her family and the detectives refused to give up. Even as the case went cold, the DNA evidence remained a beacon of hope. Detectives knew it held the potential to solve the case someday. It was preserved carefully, a silent witness waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. In the meantime, the Road family endured years of uncertainty, keeping Melanie's memory alive and advocating for answers. For the town of Bath, the murder cast a long shadow. The sense of safety that had once defined the community was shattered. Residents locked their doors, looked over their shoulders, and whispered about the tragedy that had touched their lives. But no one could have imagined how long it would take for justice to arrive, or the unlikely way in which it would finally come. As the years passed, the investigation into Melanie Road's murder became a cold case. For her family, the unanswered questions were a heavy burden, while investigators never forgot the brutality of the crime. The DNA evidence collected from the scene remained safely stored, a silent promise of future possibilities. By the 1990s, forensic science began to advance in ways that detectives in the 1980s could only have imagined. DNA profiling had become a powerful tool, capable of identifying suspects with unmatched precision. Across the world, cold cases were being reopened, and long-dormant investigations were finding new momentum. Melanie's case was no exception. In 1995, detectives decided to revisit the evidence. The DNA sample taken from the crime scene was processed using the latest technology of the time. It yielded a full genetic profile of the perpetrator, strong, undeniable evidence of who had committed the crime. But there was one problem: the profile didn't match anyone in the existing databases. Despite this setback, detectives knew they now had a crucial piece of the puzzle. They held on to hope, waiting for the day when the right match would emerge. Years turned into decades, but science continued to progress. By 2015, familial DNA matching had become a revolutionary tool in criminal investigations. This method allowed investigators to identify close relatives of individuals whose DNA was already in the database, creating new opportunities to solve cases that had once seemed impossible. It was a routine DNA submission that finally cracked the case. A young woman submitted her DNA as part of a database unrelated to the investigation. When her sample was processed, it triggered a familial match, a connection to the DNA left at Melanie's crime scene over 30 years earlier. Investigators began putting together the connection. The match led them to a family living in Bristol, just 15 miles from Bath. Among them was Christopher Hampton, a 63-year-old man who had lived an unremarkable life. Detectives quietly built their case. They traced Hampton's movements in 1984, confirmed his proximity to Bath at the time of the murder, and analyzed his behavior in the years since. The DNA evidence was undeniable, but they needed to ensure every detail aligned before making their move. As the investigation closed in, the life Hampton had built began to unravel. His unassuming existence masked the truth about what had happened on that fateful night in 1984. Investigators knew they were on the brink of solving one of the most haunting cases in Bath's history. July 2, 2015. The quiet routine of Christopher Hampton's life came to an abrupt end. Detectives arrived at his home in Bristol, armed with the evidence that had eluded them for decades. The DNA from the crime scene, preserved and patiently analyzed, was now a perfect match to the man who had lived in plain sight for over 30 years. As the officers led him away, neighbors looked on, stunned. Hampton had lived a seemingly ordinary life, a father, a husband, a man who worked and raised his family without drawing suspicion. But now, that life was collapsing, piece by piece. Investigators had finally caught up with him, and there was no escape. Forensic science had turned the tide of justice. The same DNA that had been carefully stored in 1984 was now the definitive link between Christopher Hampton and the brutal murder of Melanie Road. The illusion of a normal life was shattered in an instant. When Hampton appeared in court, the weight of the evidence against him was overwhelming. The DNA profile, combined with his proximity to Bath at the time of the murder, painted a clear and inescapable picture. There was no room for doubt, no place to hide. In November 2015, as the case moved forward, Hampton was confronted with the full scope of his crime. He faced Melanie's family, who had waited decades for this moment. Their determination to seek justice had never wavered, and now, the man responsible for their loss stood before them. In 2016, Hampton pleaded guilty to the murder of Melanie Road. His confession was a stark acknowledgement of the violence and pain he had inflicted all those years ago. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years, ensuring that he would finally pay for the life he had taken. For over 3 decades, Christopher Hampton lived with the belief that his crime would never be uncovered. He raised a family, went about his daily life, and built a facade of normalcy. Yet, it was a single breakthrough, a technological advancement he could never have foreseen, that ultimately unraveled everything. The introduction of familial DNA matching brought Hampton's carefully hidden secret into the open. It wasn't his own carelessness that betrayed him, but a decision by a family member to submit their DNA to a database. That one act, completely unrelated to him, became the key to solving Melanie Road's murder. Hampton's capture was more than a victory for justice. It was a testament to the relentless pursuit of truth by investigators and the transformative power of modern forensic science. Forensic advancements turned a cold case into a solvable one, proving that time and innovation could succeed where earlier efforts had failed. For the community of Bath, Hampton's conviction closed a painful chapter that had spanned generations. Melanie's murder had cast a shadow over the city, a constant reminder of vulnerability in a place once considered safe. The resolution of the case brought relief, but it also underscored the enduring impact of such a violent act. Many residents who had lived through the uncertainty of 1984 spoke about the sense of closure that came with Hampton's sentencing. The streets where Melanie had walked were no longer haunted by unanswered questions, though the memory of what had happened would never fade entirely. Christopher Hampton's arrest and conviction raised broader questions about the power and implications of forensic science. If familial DNA could solve this case, how many other unsolved crimes might be cracked open using the same methods? And what ethical considerations arise when such technology reaches deeper into our private lives? As technology continues to evolve, the lessons of Melanie Road's case remind us of the delicate balance between the pursuit of justice and the preservation of privacy. What secrets remain locked away, waiting for the right combination of persistence, innovation, and time to bring them to light? What do you think about the role of DNA technology in solving cold cases? Should more resources be dedicated to applying these tools to unsolved crimes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found Melanie's story compelling, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that deserves to be told.